Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans, and I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 25 years. I started during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a panic disorder that had left me housebound. I was on disability from work, and basically my entire life stopped. I happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in the late 90s, had been practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation for several decades, and this is what he offered me as a way of dealing with what I was going through. And I was incredibly unimpressed with his suggestion. My feeling was like, I can't go out, I can't work, I can't do anything. My life has stopped, and here's this guy talking about watching the breathing and stuff. What the hell is this? All right. Well, I figured, hey, I'm stuck at home all day anyway. I'm not really doing much of anything else besides freaking out. All right, I'll give this a shot just long enough. I can go back to him and honestly say, look, dude, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now, please? And never had that conversation with him. It's been a quarter of a century now, and I'm still practicing. Now I'm teaching. My entire life has changed, and well, it's worked out pretty well so far. So never been so glad to be so wrong. So here I am, and thank you for being with me. Today's topic is confronting insomnia. This is one that I have worked with myself very deeply over the years, as some of you who have been with me for a while know. One of my triggers for anxiety, panic, and so forth, and I don't think I'm alone in this, one of my triggers historically has been feelings of being tired, exhaustion, sleepiness. So those times when I would wake up in the middle of the night, oh, did I just wake up and notice I woke up and go back to sleep? No. Start getting anxious about it and then well, we'll get to that in a second. What I want to do is present a couple of high-level aspects of what we're going to be doing here. The first thing I want to do is talk about how we reframe our approach to this topic. Then we'll talk about what we actually do with it once we've done some of this reframing. Okay, and here's what I mean by reframing. I chose the title of today's talk very deliberately. I am certainly not going to come out here and say I have solved insomnia, right? I have not cured insomnia. I certainly have made great strides with it. I've made a lot of progress with it. But how do I want to phrase this? And I thought, confronting insomnia. I was like, what's the actual dictionary definition of confrontation? I went and I looked it up. And there were a couple of different definitions. One is meeting someone face to face with hostile or argumentative intent. Okay? Confrontation. Meet someone face to face with hostile or argumentative intent. But then there was another definition right below it. Confrontation. Face up to and deal with a problem or difficult situation. Those are very different definitions. Right? So when you think of confronting insomnia, confronting any difficult, but in this case, confronting insomnia, what was your interpretation? Which way did you frame it? Because I know for me, certainly, having been raised in a Western society that places a lot of, we tend to frame, right? We're talking about reframing. We tend to frame things in terms of battle motifs, going to war, right? Political debates are cage matches and showdowns, and we have wars on disease and wars on drugs. And everything is framed as some kind of a, how do I win? So I think many of us tend to default to this concept of confrontation as, oh, we're going to war. There's a threat, right? But what's interesting is, if you look at what the Buddha taught, the Buddha spent 45 years of his life teaching just one thing, which is how do we alleviate our stress and suffering? Not pain per se. We don't have a choice about pain. We're going to experience pain in this life, right? We're going to experience discomfort. Stress and suffering are things that arise when we don't deal with pain and discomfort skillfully. And the Pali word for stress and suffering that the Buddha used was dukkha. And if you translate dukkha literally into English, it means difficult to face. That second definition that I offered of confrontation, face up to and deal with a problem or difficult situation. This is what the Buddha was talking about. Working with something difficult to face. There's a very big difference between approaching something with hostility and saying, well, no, how do I work with this? Which is one of the reasons I often say we have to deal with pain skillfully, but sometimes I use the word discomfort instead. Because to me, discomfort just seems more manageable. I think of pain and suddenly I'm a 4-year-old again in the doctor's office getting his first shots and like losing his freaking mind. Unmanageable. Meltdown. Discomfort. Oh, discomfort? Well, I can work with discomfort. Right? So there's this perceptive difference with how we are approaching these things. I saw this picture a number of years ago. Maybe some of you have seen it. This hand-drawn picture. Love this thing. It's a picture of this little girl with this huge, like, demon towering over her. It's like 4 times her size. And she's looking up at him. And it just looks like, oh, geez, I mean, she's done. She's screwed. But then you look at the picture a little bit more closely and you see a couple of things that change the whole perception of what's going on here. First thing that you notice is the demon's on a leash. And she's holding it. She's holding the leash. And then you look closer and you see, yeah, she's looking up at the demon right in his eyes. But she's smiling. Fascinating. What I see when I look at that, based on my experience, is, oh, she not only recognizes that the demon is her, and not only realizes that she's the one in control, ultimately, of this demon because, well, it's her. She's even able to show it compassion in the form of this smile, even though she hasn't necessarily yet figured out how to let go of that leash. Okay? Sometimes I talk about one of my early insights in this practice was what I call the direction of grip, how we feel like thoughts are gripping us. We can't shake them. And then I realized one day, wait a minute, between these thoughts and what I think of as myself thinking them, only one of us has volition, right? So if there's a direction of grip here, it's not the thoughts gripping me. I must be gripping them. That's what's represented here. So if we turn this to our discussion of, say, insomnia. One of the monks that I quote on here quite often, Tanasaru Bhikkhu, he relayed this story about how one night he was about to go to sleep for the night, and his teacher at the time said, no, you know what? Stay up and sit all night. Practice all night. Don't go to bed. And he's just like, but, he's like, no, just stay up and practice all night. And Tanasaru Bhikkhu's like, well, but, I mean, that's gonna, he started to kind of protest a little bit. And his teacher says, well, will it kill you? Oh, no, I guess not. Oh, then you can do it. A little extreme, right? A little extreme. But what's interesting about it, and this is not my way of saying we should just stay up all night every night. The reason I illustrate it is because what a shift in perception right there. Because now, suddenly, he's not supposed to go to sleep. And I'd be willing to bet he probably had a lot of trouble not falling asleep that night. Probably because he wasn't supposed to. Wasn't trying to. All right? It's just a hunch. But suddenly there's this perceptive shift. I'm supposed to go to sleep now. And all of a sudden, oh wait, I'm not supposed to go to sleep now. Sleep has gone from being the desirable thing to, well, there's still a part of us that desires it, but now there's this part of us that says, oh, no. Undesirable, wrong, right? All that's shifted is the perception. To bring it maybe a little closer to home, something I certainly experience. You ever have one of those times when you wake up, I don't know, 1 a.m, like, oh God, here we go. You look at the clock, it's 1 o'clock. Oh, gee, and try to get back to sleep. At some point, you look at the clock again. Oh, it's 2 o'clock. Still 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Let's say your alarm is set for 6 o'clock. If you're anything like me, round about 5 o'clock, you say, fuck it, it's too late now. No bother trying to get back to sleep now. Boom. Out. And then the alarm goes off, and it's like, so I've gotten that hour. I'm just like, lovely, right? Well, what happened? I stopped fighting, right? In a sense, I gave up. I gave up a fruitless fight, really. So when the Buddha taught about this dukkha, stress and suffering, when something comes up that is difficult to face, something painful, he said we have these 2 reactions to it. The first is bewilderment. The hell is this? Right? And the second one is we try to find a way out. How the hell do I get out of this? Right? The hell is this? How the hell do I get out of it? And based on our human condition that I talk about so often, our survival mechanisms, what do we do when we find something uncomfortable, find something painful? Treat it like a threat. And we bring that first definition of confrontation that I offered, hostility. Become argumentative. And our fight or flight reaction kicks in, right? Now, our bodies do all kinds of fascinating things when fight or flight kicks in. And not one of them is go to sleep. Because that's a bad way to survive a threat. Really bad way to survive a threat is to fall asleep. So this fight or flight kicks up, and we get into these cycles of frustration and tension and exhaustion and anxiety. And I'm not going to speak for anyone else here. I'm just speaking for myself. Some of this may resonate. So all of this reframing that I'm talking about, and we're going to get to a few actual strategies in a moment, but all of this reframing that I'm talking about, very often I talk about how this practice is a matter of seeing what's here and seeing what we are doing with what's here. And the reason I'm talking about all of this reframing is because in this case, what's here is insomnia. Insomnia sucks. And in the moment, it might be here. Not a hell of a lot we can do about that. So let's direct our attention to the part we can do something about, which is the what we're doing with what's here part. This isn't some fancy way of trying to deny the suckiness of insomnia. We're not saying it doesn't suck. What we're saying is we do have options for how we work with it. And the way that we work with what's here, in my experience, does ultimately end up changing what's here. We can't directly change what's here. Oh, I must sleep now. Okay, good luck. But when we work with these things skillfully, when we choose the right options, in my experience, the things themselves have a way of changing. I may not be able to change pain and discomfort directly, but when I deal with how I approach them so that I'm causing myself less stress and suffering, my experience of pain and discomfort does change because now I know, oh, wait a minute, I know how to work with that. And that in itself really changes the experience of the pain and discomfort itself. Again, how do we work with something that is difficult to face without going to war? Without going to war. So let's talk a little bit about the what we're doing. And for this, I'm really just going to talk about what I've done. I'm going to offer what I have found to work for me. And I offer it as something for you to try. And this is not something that is specific to insomnia. Some of the things I'm going to talk about here are things some of you have heard me talk about in various other contexts. As I often say, we cannot force relaxation, right? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. How do you force relaxation? So we focus on what we can control, which is setting the causes and conditions for things like ease, relaxation, perhaps sleep, to arise. Very often I talk about the importance of taking our practice off the cushion. Cushion time's great, cushion time's important, but if all you do is get good at sitting on a cushion, who the hell cares? How's that help you? Right? The idea is to be able to take what we learn in this practice on the cushion, off the cushion, into our daily lives, or perhaps in this case, into our nightly lives. And this is a pretty literal example of taking our practice off the cushion and maybe into bed. If we change our focus from the object that we are grasping for, in this case, sleep. If we change our focus from the object of that grasping to the process of the grasping itself, okay? I'm going to explain what I mean in a couple of different ways. Picture you're walking down a set of stairs and you're holding the railing and you lose your balance. And now you grasp onto that railing so you don't fall. Think of the difference between focusing in that moment, assuming you had the wherewithal to do this, right? Think, instead of focusing on the feeling of the railing itself, instead of focusing on the railing, the object being grasped at, bringing attention to the muscles in the hand, the flexing of the arm. Okay? Switching the focus from what you are grasping at and instead looking at the process, feeling the process of the grasping itself. I'm going to get a little bit technical for a second. When the Buddha talked about grasping, clinging, these are stress and suffering. Grasping and clinging, this is stress and suffering, as he taught it. And this grasping and clinging comes from different kinds of craving. So he taught about 3 different kinds of craving that lead to 4 different kinds of grasping. And one of the kinds of craving is craving for identity. I'm going somewhere with this, okay? Craving for identity. And what he means by this is we want to see ourselves and have others see us in certain ways in different contexts. I want to have the identity of being the good employee, the good parent, the good sibling, the good teacher, right? And a craving like that can lead to different kinds of clinging. Not saying that these are bad, okay? We're not judging these as good or bad, just these are what they are, okay? I want to be this, okay? And then that leads to certain kinds of clinging. I need to engage in this kind of behavior. The world is supposed to be like that so I can fit in like that and so forth. The whole reason I mention this is this. This is something I wrote actually just before I went on vacation. I was doing some writing, and this is a clip of something that I wrote. I wrote, craving for identity leads to some or all of the 4 clingings that ironically do lead to an identity, but not the one we intend. By trying to grasp an identity, we become not that identity, but the grasper. The reason I mention all this is because the same thing happens here in the context of our discussion. Trying to force sleep doesn't make us a sleeper. It makes us a grasper. So the Buddha also talked about appropriate attention. And the classic question of what drives appropriate attention is, what, when I do it, eases stress and suffering? Again, not pain and discomfort. The pain and discomfort of insomnia might be here. What, when I do it, decreases stress and suffering? And what I have found is that when I focus on the process of grasping itself, what I'm doing, the mind, the body, the breathing, when I focus on what I'm doing, in this case, grasping, instead of focusing on the sleep I'm grasping for, it ironically short-circuits the entire process. Because there are certain causes and conditions I'm putting in place that are resulting in this grasping, right? Oh God, what's tomorrow going to be like? I have to do this. Oh, and what if this? And oh, dude, and this feels terrible. That's driving all this grasping. And I'm getting caught up in it and continuing to grasp. But if I turn the mirror on itself and look at that process itself, oh, what am I actually doing here? Oh, geez, look at that thought pattern. And look at, wait, what's going on in the body right now? And let me look at that. Well, geez, look what I've done here. I've changed the causes and conditions. I've changed what I'm doing. I'm no longer putting the causes and conditions that led to grasping in place. I'm looking at the grasping that has resulted from it. And because I've changed the causes and conditions, I now get different results, which is, holy shit, the grasping is easing. It's easing. Because now I'm looking behind the curtain and seeing the process of it instead of driving the process of it. I've jumped off the hamster wheel I was perpetuating, and now I can look at it from this new perspective, new perception. Oh, that's how it works. I jump on, I run, it keeps going, and let me not do that. Let me look at the wheel itself. And as we start to do that, we start to see why we started doing it in the first place. Oh, there's the fear. There's the fear. And, all right, well, let's take our two things that we talked about earlier and apply it to fear. What's here? What are we doing with it? What's here? Fear. What am I doing with it? Getting on that hamster wheel. How's that working out? Fucking awful. So let's maybe not do that. What happens if I look at the fear itself? I looked at the grasping and it eased. I mean, maybe not right away. It's a process. It's a practice. But we start to see, oh, wait a minute. This is a new way to approach this. The old way really sucked. Let's see this. Let's see what this does. Oh, it's easing a little bit, but now I'm feeling the fear that's telling me, no, you've got to get to sleep. You got to. Interesting. We start to notice the stuff that, well, we weren't able to notice before because we were running so damn hard on that hamster wheel. I'll give you a personal example. I'm going a little bit long here, but we'll get to some practice in a few moments. But I'll give you a personal example of mine. I had my anxiety and panic and my whole life-stopping crash start, as I said earlier, 25 years ago. I went through this really weird thing about 13, 14 years ago, which to this day, I don't know what the hell happened. But it lasted about a year and a half. And I don't know if it was physically based, if it was mentally based. I think it was really a physical thing that ended up affecting me psychologically. Certainly, it was very anxiety provoking and so forth, where I felt very out of sorts and was getting these feelings of simultaneous exhaustion and adrenaline rushes. So I was always keyed up and completely depleted at the same time. It would come on for several days. It would stop for several days. Doctors, batteries of tests, the whole thing. Didn't stop my life this time because I'd been practicing for about 12, 13 years at this point, but really sucked. And insomnia was part of it. Insomnia was a regular part of it. And there were a lot of nights when I woke up after, I don't know, maybe an hour or two of sleep. And again, I can't explain where this was coming from, but when I would wake up, I would be in that state where you're not quite completely awake. I was awake, but where you're having those little sort of sleep hallucination things happening. And I would see a lot of visions. I mean, not if I opened my eyes. I kept my eyes closed, but I was seeing like these visions, and sometimes it would be those sort of kaleidoscopic things that I think we all see sometimes, but sometimes it would be much more vivid, and it was scary. It was scary. Sometimes it would resemble, if you remember in the old Poltergeist movie, when they walk into the room and all the shit's flying around in the room, and it was very scary and unnerving, and my natural first inclination was to fight with it. This has to stop. This can't be here. And then at some point, my practice kicked in. I was like, well, wait a minute. Okay. And I started just watching it. And over time, I started to just call it the show. Oh, I'm going to watch the show. The show's here. I'm going to watch the show. And slowly came to realize that, well, it wasn't inherently threatening. I was just treating it as a threat because it was something unfamiliar, maybe a little uncomfortable, maybe a little disconcerting. It was certainly coming up during something that was very uncomfortable, insomnia, anxiety, and so forth. But it's what was here, and what was I doing with what was here? And how is it working out for me? That pretty much stopped once the whole, whatever that thing was that I went through stopped after about a year and a half. Every once in a great while, to this day, I will wake up and here's the show. Not in a time of anxiety, or it just happens to whatever psychological, visual mechanism, however the shit works. I don't know. I'll be seeing the show. And I'm like, oh, it's the show. Holy shit. Yeah, let me check this out. And it's almost kind of exciting to take a look at it again. And it's like, well, goddamn. Now there's a shift in perspective. There's a shift in perception. There's what I'm driving at with this confronting. Right? So, in the times when I wake up in the middle of the night, I mean, there's that initial, oh shit, okay, well, geez, okay. And then I notice the fight. And I'm like, okay, there's the fight. And here's the breathing. What else is going on here? Well, I can feel my body against the mattress and the sheets. I can feel how things shift as I breathe in and out. Oh, there's some tension in my stomach. Yep, there's that fight. Yep, still some fight happening there. Okay, I can breathe with that. I can breathe down there. Oh, and here's the what ifing. Yep, there's the what ifing. What if I'm this tired tomorrow? And what if this comes up? And what if that? And what if I don't get back to that? Yep, there's that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know where that's coming from. There's the fear. Okay, seen this. Difficult to face, but with options for how we do so. And how we do so sets the stage for how we do so in the next moment and the next time. And in my experience, over the course of time, as we continue to do this, it changes what's here. I still go through times when night after night after night, I wake up in the middle of the night. And when I do, it's like, okay, I know what to do now. Or I know what not to do now. Now, does this all mean I'm going to get right back to sleep? No. I might be up all night. Not usually, but I might be. But getting back to sleep isn't the point. It's not the point. The same way relaxation is not the point of the practice. It's a byproduct. The point is what, when I do it, eases my stress and suffering. How do I work with something difficult to face in such a way that I'm not making it worse? That's the point. That's the point. Where are we directing our attention? How are we using our perception? Two of the factors of karma. This is our karmic experience we're talking about here. And this doesn't just apply to insomnia, right? This applies to everything. Which is why we can practice this with each other here now, even though we may not be experiencing insomnia at the moment. So now I've really gone way over. So let's go ahead and sit for a bit. Okay. I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I'm suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And much like we have covered in the last half hour or so, if there is some tension here, physical tension, mental tension, emotional tension, that's perfectly fine. Our biggest problem with tension tends not to be the presence of tension, right? The what's here, but the what we're doing with what's here. Oh, tension? Oh, that's not allowed. I don't like tension. Tension's painful, uncomfortable. I'm meditating right now. There shouldn't be any tension. Not supposed to be like that, right? Okay. Well, it's here anyway. So we have those options for how we work with it. Is that a skillful option? To fight it? Go to war with it? You know, as I often like to say, that's just bringing more tension to the tension that's already here. So how is bringing tension to tension going to get rid of tension? Releasing tension is a byproduct. It can happen in its own time. How does that happen? Well, by turning that mirror on it. Looking at it itself. Oh, there's tension. What's it like? Where is it? Is it still? Is it moving? Is it sharp? Is it dull? What's my reaction to it? Oh, to go to war with it. Okay. You know, we don't then have to go to war with our instinct to go to war with it. That just gets us into the same catch-22, right? So we just notice, oh, I have this desire to stop it, to stamp it up. Okay. That's also what's here. And what am I doing with what's here? Well, for right now, I'm noticing it. We're getting the lay of the land. We're seeing what we're starting with. Because how are we going to skillfully work with what's here if we don't first check out what's here? So let's take a moment and notice what we've brought with us. What are we starting with? Get that lay of the land. See what's here. Including perhaps seeing how we're feeling about what's here. Because that is also something that's just here. And if you haven't already, you may start to bring your attention to your breathing, which is also something that is here. And very often, when we bring our attention to our breathing, the breathing changes. Right? It's very difficult to bring our attention to the breathing without having it change somehow. Maybe deliberately, maybe not so deliberately. It's a very vivid example of how bringing attention to a process changes the process itself. Just like I was talking about with grasping. When we are focused on the object that we are grasping at, we keep grasping. When we shift our focus to the grasping process itself, it changes. Just like when we bring our attention to the breathing. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's subtle, but it almost always changes. Right? Like that saying, what we observe changes what is being observed. And the breathing is another thing that sometimes we fight with. Right? Oh, I'm meditating, so I have to breathe like this. I have to breathe like that. It's supposed to be this way. It's supposed to be that way. More perceptions, more storylines. We can even view or perceive breathing as a threat. I did for years. My panic disorder. Oh, if the breathing gets too fast, too shallow, no. That could be a panic attack. It's not allowed. And fight with the breathing. It's got to be like this. No, make it deeper, make it longer. No. Then when I started this practice and the guidance was to just observe the breathing as it was, without trying to change it. Oh. After years and years of trying to control it, oh, you better believe I confronted that with hostility as a threat. But I gave it a shot. Found out my perceptions and storylines were not just inaccurate, but were actually causing the exact problems I was trying to avoid. All the stress and suffering that I was creating, trying to force the breathing to be a certain way so I didn't have panic attacks, that was exactly what was sparking the panic attacks. Oops. So we can just look at the breathing as it is. We can shape and control it in this practice. There is room for that. But we do not have to. And I usually don't. The more I practice with it, the more I notice subtle levels of shaping and controlling that I'm still actually doing that I had not been able to see before. And when I see them, I just notice them. Oh. I hadn't seen that before. Interesting. What happens when we simply focus on what we're doing in the present moment and whether it's creating a stress and suffering right now? What happens when we look at that rather than looking at where we're trying to get to? Instead of focusing on that object of grasping, of clinging. What happens when we turn that mirror on the process of what we're doing right now itself? Not why we're doing it. What we're doing. And how it's working out right now, in this moment. And breathe with that. At some point, because we have changed the causes and conditions, we have changed the direction of our attention, something has to shift. But again, not if we're looking for the shift, not if we're doing this just so we get the shift, right? That's just an object of grasping again. We come to it with a legitimate curiosity and openness. Just keep coming back to the breathing. Noticing what's here, what you're doing with what's here. It sounds so simple. It is simple. It's not easy. But it is simple. And by doing it again and again and again, it's incredibly effective. Can't always say how or when. But you start to see these patterns. You start to see what keeps pulling you away from the breathing, what keeps demanding your attention. Start to catch that process of getting on that hamster wheel. And get better and better at starting to see these things unfolding in real time. I mean, very often, and particularly when we're starting out with a practice like this, we generally have to catch the stuff in hindsight. But as we develop these skills, these new habits of exercising these more skillful options for dealing with pain and discomfort, well, we start to catch things a little faster, a little faster. It starts to get to the point where, yeah, you start catching it in just about real time. And when you can catch these processes and you can catch what you're doing as it's happening, there's a tremendous inner power there. So as a way of noting our perception, notice what comes up for you. When I say that we'll be sitting for 3 more minutes. Notice it. What came up? Some of you may have thought, I can't do another 3 minutes of this. Some of you may have thought, oh geez, only 3 more minutes. I haven't gotten everything I wanted to yet. Right? Same 3 minutes. Whole bunch of different perceptions. Different storylines. But what's actually here? Well, some sounds that I made with my mouth that have made it to your ears, that have given you the concept of how you think of 3 minutes and this practice, and something's come up in regard to what your practice has been like up until now. At some other time, you might have a completely different reaction, completely different perception. The point isn't to not have perception. How are you going to do that? The point is to see, how am I using perception? Is the way that I am using my perception causing suffering? Easing suffering? And in my experience, that's kind of all you have to do most of the time. You don't really have to try to change anything. As you keep watching that and seeing that, the subconscious mind and body know what to do. When they start seeing again and again, oh, the changes just seem to happen on their own. All you really got to do is keep turning that mirror on itself. Do it again, do it again, do it again. So take these last few moments and perhaps notice if there's been a shift since we started. Perhaps you feel better. Perhaps you feel worse. Perhaps you feel no change whatsoever. The point isn't so much what your answer is. The point is asking the question. As a wise man once said, this practice is about learning how to ask the right questions, rather than trying to come armed with the answers in advance. Great choice of words, armed with the answers. Think back to our confrontation. Are we thinking of confrontation as hostility and a threat that we have to come armed for? Or are we seeing there's something difficult to face? And we have options for how we do so, and which options we choose. determine whether we cause stress and suffering for ourselves. Thank you, everyone. I will go ahead and put some links into the chat, and then we can get to some Q&A, see what's on your mind. So the first couple of links there that I've put in are for my website and my sessions page. These free sessions are supported by one-on-ones that I do with folks. I have a limited number of slots available for people who are interested in diving a little bit deeper and exploring some of these concepts and practices for things that you might be dealing with in your life. This may be able to help in the way that it's helped me and so many others over the course of the past, now 2,600 years. So you're welcome to grab a look at my page, mindfulnessandbluejeans.com. You can also sign up for my mailing list there. You get a message from me about once every couple of months. It won't be a lot of mail. And if you'd like to book something, there's a link to my sessions page. I also have my email address there. If you'd like to reach out directly, you're always welcome. Some of these sessions and ones that I offer in other places like Insight Timer and so forth are up on YouTube. So I have my YouTube channel there, as well as my Patreon page. And some folks have asked about how to help support these directly. So I have PayPal and Venmo links in there if you'd like to do that. And I think that's all I have. So we can get to my favorite part of these, which is seeing what's on your mind. If you have any questions or observations or aha moments. Hey, Barbara. Great to see you.
Good to see you, dear.
Cheers.
So here's my question. I am one of these people who gets up in the middle of the night, usually 2 to 3 a.m. Sometimes I go back, sometimes I don't. The word out is if you get up, don't spend more than 20 minutes or a half an hour in bed trying to get back to sleep. Get up and do something. Read a book, watch something on TV, make a list. I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it, actually. I should reiterate this, something that I mentioned, I think, during the talk, and I'm glad you raised this. What I offered here was what I found to work for me, not necessarily what's going to work for anybody else, right? I've seen some of these same things. I've heard like, okay, get up and do a thing, or, don't do it for this amount of time. One of the things that I found to work for me, that my acupuncturist, when I mentioned to him at one point years ago, I was like, yeah, I do this thing. And the thing that I mentioned was I don't open my eye. I try not to open my eyes, like to look at the clock and so forth. And he was like, yeah, it's better not to open your eyes. There's all kinds of... One of the main things, of course, that the Buddha taught, that some of you, and you've certainly heard me talk about many times, is the importance of experimentation, not just in terms of figuring out what is best for each of us, because it's going to be different, but even figuring out what's going to be best for ourselves at different times. So there have probably been a couple of times over the years where I woke up in the middle of the night and maybe after a half hour or so, I was just like, fuck it, I'm getting up and doing something, and, but usually not. But in those moments, it was just like, yeah, why not? Let me see what happens. And that is so much a part of this practice. Is one of the things that I like to say, and I always joke with one of my yoga teachers about this, because she says that in class all the time. You hear people say, again, in a threatening manner, you'll hear people very often say, fuck around and find out, right? But that is so much like what this practice, you could sum up so much of this practice and life itself as fuck around and find out. Try a thing. How's it working out? Oh, geez, that didn't work out so well. Let me try this thing, So if you find that something like that works for you, yeah, go with it. Absolutely. What I have presented here is just what I have found to work for me. And that's not even to say I'm not going to find something next year or tomorrow or whatever that I find is even better. And I'm going to do another session of this, and just be like, wait a minute, I found this other thing, right? Yeah, experiment.
I think the idea of the grasping is essential for me, though, because if
Yes.
I can say, okay, it's 3:15, I'm into this novel, I'll read the novel, fine, and either I'll fall asleep or I won't fall asleep, as opposed to turn on the light, ow, my eyes, okay, I'll read the novel, oh, but I really want to be asleep, oh, I've got something at 9 o'clock in the morning, but the grasping that you talked about really made sense to me, something to work with.
Yeah. I'm glad that landed for you, because it's really the heart of the Buddhist teachings. One of the misconceptions that comes up around the teachings is that the Buddha said that clinging leads to suffering. Clinging doesn't lead to suffering. Clinging is the suffering. The clinging process is the suffering. So the more we can observe that process itself, turn the mirror on that process, like, oh, because it's not something happening to us. It's something we're doing. We are doing it. It's an activity. We do it so habitually that it feels like it's just happening. So one of the first things that we have to see is like, oh, wait a minute. No, I'm doing something here. All right. So the more that we can examine that process and how we're driving it, that's really the key.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
As usual.
Cheers. Great
Cheers.
to see you. Hey, Denise.
I'm actually blessed because I don't not wake up sometimes and then get in my head and not go back to sleep and start worrying about it. But I've noticed so many people tell themselves things like, I have trouble sleeping. I never nap. And it's like they've deemed it is going to continue in that manner. They don't open themselves up to, well, why don't you just close your eyes and rest? And you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you're saying, I have to control my breathing or I'll have a panic attack.
Yeah. It's those storylines. And that in itself is a form of grasping. And kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the craving for identity. We crave these identities. And sometimes they're identities we don't even like, right? But we grasp onto them because they're giving us some sense of self, some sense of familiarity, some sense of stability. Oh, I know myself. I'm a person who can't sleep and sucks at this and sucks at this. Well, why do you want to identify as that? Well, at least I know who I am. It's like, okay. Now, is that creating stress or suffering or easing stress and suffering, right? Yeah, that's exactly the kind of stuff that we want to see. Like I was talking about during the sitting with that perception. How are we using our perception? We're going to be perceiving things one way or another. The question is, how are we using our perception? Are we using it in such a way that is creating stress and suffering or easing stress and suffering? So that's a great example of that.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for raising that. Yeah, Anne, go ahead.
Okay. I have a brother who is just not my guy. He's just not my guy. And I ponder so much of, do I really need to be comfortable with him, with all the shit that he does that I don't like? I just don't know how to deal with him, how to think of him. Or do I give up the striving for something that I'm not going to get and be okay with that? You know, family member's a little different than the guy down the street.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And I say that as someone who also has a very close family member with whom I have had these exact same issues. It is. It's very difficult. What I often find is when dealing with issues like that, which have a way of not only, I mean, they can be very complex to begin with because of all the history and relationship and so forth, but then they can also have a way of creating this, what I like to think of as a secondary complexity. Not just how do I deal with this, but how am I supposed to be dealing with this? It almost becomes this secondary issue of like, first, I don't know how to deal with this. And then a secondary issue of, how do I deal with not being able to deal with this, right? And it starts to compound. It starts to ripple. And in those times when I see that things are becoming increasingly convoluted, complex, starting to layer upon themselves, those are the times when I realize simplicity is the key here.
It's what? I'm sorry?
Simplicity.
Yeah.
And make it just as simple as, am I creating or decreasing my stress and suffering in this moment? Is this line of thinking in this moment increasing or decreasing my suffering? And watch the process itself. That's still a process that you can turn the mirror onto. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to give you an answer in the moment.
Yeah.
Right? And you know this. But there are two things here. The first thing is, simply by making that shift, you are now changing the causes and conditions and getting you out of that spinning mindset. We're trying to get in the middle of it and trying to stop it spinning, and it just doesn't work. So we at least stop that. And that opens the possibility that, well, now that we're not caught up in the spinning we're trying to stop while we're spinning in it anymore, now we at least have the possibility of seeing something clearly. And an answer may start to come. And it could be an answer about how we interact with them when we are interacting with them. It could be an answer that is like, I need to set different boundaries with this person. It could be whatever, you know, and even whatever that answer is not necessarily going to apply a year from now, even if it works now. The point is, how am I creating my stress and suffering? Because they can't. Somebody else cannot cause us stress and suffering. They can cause us pain. Someone else can hurt us, if in no other way, certainly physically, right? But stress and suffering's on us. You've probably heard me say this before. How other people handle their business is their business. How we handle how other people handle their business is our business. Right? So if we find that the way we are handling how someone else is handling their business is causing us stress and suffering, guess what, sunshine? They ain't going to be able to help with that. So we have to look in that moment. What am I doing right now? Even if the other person's being an absolute asshole, okay, they're an asshole, whatever. I'm not saying you're saying that about your brother, but extreme example. What am I doing? That's what's here. What am I doing with what's here? And that's not even necessarily what's here. That's just our perception of what's here, to go back to the perception bit, right? Because whether or not somebody else is being an asshole in itself is a complete perception. It's a total perception. Some guy comes and like barrels into you and knocks you over. What are you, an asshole? It's like, well, there was this train coming and I just knocked you out of the way. Oh God, thank you. Right? Suddenly not an asshole. Suddenly not an asshole. So it's our perception. And I'm not saying that if someone else is acting like an asshole, that they're not. I'm saying we're not responding to them. We're responding to our perception. Always. Always. We are responding to our perception of what's coming up, not what's coming up itself. Because if we were responding to what's coming up itself, we would all have the exact same perception of it, right?
Yeah.
So when you find yourself spinning like that, that's when I opt for simplicity. What am I doing right now and how's it working out? Oh, I'm spinning on this thing, trying to figure this out because I want it resolved. I want it sorted. I want it settled. That's what I'm grasping at. I'm grasping for a resolution. I'm grasping to not feel this conflict. That's what I'm grasping at. And how's this grasping working out? Well, I'm spinning and getting angry and getting frustrated. Well, okay, do you want to keep doing that? Well, I want the resolution, but this apparently ain't the way to go about it. So let me try something else. And maybe I'll get that resolution, maybe I won't. But at least I'm not causing all this other happy horse shit in the meantime. Because that's certainly, not only am I causing myself all the stress and suffering, but it's not getting me the resolution I wanted anyway. Right? So bring it to simplicity.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Cheers. Thank you for that. Hi, Alina. Welcome.
Thank you. This is my very first session with you live. I had heard one of your other sessions, but it was already pre-recorded. So I really appreciate, the last session and now today's session. The two questions, if I may, I have, or the two comments I have, with respect to insomnia, I totally understand what you're saying. And I try to practice just watch, turn the mirror on yourself and see what's happening. Or, do something else if this is not working out. But I find what's happening is it becomes, your brain then gets used to, again, waking up 2:00 in the morning because it's time to watch yourself or it's time to read the book again. It becomes a habit, and that's one thing, is that when you do that, your brain says, okay, we're going to do this every night. Okay. That's one. And then the other comment I have with respect to dealings with other people. Sometimes you say, my resolution here is perhaps to walk away. Because how many times can you take it upon yourself? It tells me that you take it upon yourself and see how you deal with it. But enough with taking it upon yourself. Sometimes it's you need to walk away. And in today's era, I'm finding more people are selfish and they do things for their own interest. They act in their interest. They talk in their own interest, which makes you say, I need to walk away. So I'm getting to a point where you're walking away from this one, you're walking away from that one. And pretty soon, you don't have anyone around you. And that's my perception. Now, I don't know what your feedback is.
Trying to decide which one I want to take first. I'm going to start with the second one first.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to preface this by saying I may not have anything for the first one. Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm starting with the second one first.
Sure.
Something might bubble in the subconscious as I'm going through the second one. Because the first one was very interesting. The Buddha had what he called the triple gem, which was the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha being the awakening of the Buddha himself, the Dhamma being the teachings, and the Sangha being the community, the spiritual community. And he said that it was the Sangha that was the most important of the three. And he placed a huge amount of importance on associating with people of integrity, associating with people of honesty, and associating with people who understood, but more importantly, practiced the Dhamma. And I think one of the lines that you see in some of the texts sometimes is that there's no fellowship with a fool, right? And he could be very harsh when it came to dealing with people who didn't meet his standards for who he would interact with. Now, one of the interesting things that you mentioned is how so many people are doing everything for themselves. And I know what you're saying. But at the same time, what's really interesting is this is a practice of doing something for ourselves. However, it's a practice of when we do it for ourselves, if we're doing it properly, it ends up benefiting everybody. So when I see people being narcissistic or egotistical or what have you, which is one of my peeves, which I'm sure I myself am not immune to, right? I notice that and I think, okay, where am I doing this myself? Where can I watch for this in myself? And I can see that there's a level of compassion there, because that kind of mindset and that kind of behavior is coming from a place of insecurity and suffering and grasping, all right? And it's one that I can see in myself. And we are all the same in that way. Again, what the difference is how we handle it. It's something that's here for each of us in some way, I think. But how we go about handling it can be very different. And if we find that we are surrounding ourselves with people who are handling it in a way that is not skillful, then yeah, that can rub off on us, right? So the Buddha himself said that it made more sense to pursue a life in solitary than to be surrounding oneself with, in his words, fools. But we can still, we may find that some of our old relationships no longer serve us, but that doesn't mean that we can't look for ways to form new ones with people who perhaps are better skilled. That's some of what I hope and attempt to offer here in this Sangha that we have here. But yes, one of the big things that does happen in this practice is we end up drawing new and more skillful boundaries, as you found. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's something I've had to do, as I was mentioning to Anne, with a very close family member of my own. Something doesn't make me particularly happy, but I need to be fair to myself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I do want to quickly touch on the other. We're coming up on 12:30 here, but I do want to. It's a really interesting thing that you raised. I don't necessarily have anything specific for what you're raising in terms of it becoming like a habit where your constitution has been like, okay, it's time to do this thing. The only thing that I can really say is, again, it's a matter of, I'll say two things. On the one hand, it's a matter of, okay, here is something that's here, and well, what are we going to do with it? And ostensibly what you've been doing with it is something, where you're being with it, right? And you're practicing with it. Ostensibly, that is something that is causing less stress and suffering than things you'd be doing otherwise, like, fighting with it, say. In which case, it's still a valuable practice. We don't really get to say if we're going to keep waking up and having that happen. But on the other hand, as we were also talking about, like with Barbara earlier, experiment. If you find, well, wait a minute, okay, I'm trying this thing, and okay, it does seem to help in that I'm not fighting with it, but it's having this side effect of like, now I think I'm starting to wake up every night specifically because my body thinks it's time to do that, whereas it ordinarily wouldn't be waking up, right? So I'm actually, in a sense, making the initial problem worse. Then try something else. Mm-hmm. Then try something else. Try the getting up and doing something, or try the reading, or glass of water or something, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is why I say I don't really have anything specific, because I can only speak from my experience, and that's not an experience I've had directly. So experiment. Or maybe experiment with what you're doing during the day. Like they're always saying, obviously don't drink caffeine at night and stuff. Maybe experiment with other aspects of your habits and your living that might have an effect on your sleep, which I'm guessing you probably have already anyway.
But that's a good point, because I had actually realized that not too long ago, that reduce the stress and the suffering during the day will help to sleep better.
Oh, God,
because, yeah.
And absolutely physical exercise.
Yeah, which I do. But I think it's more of the mental, what goes on, the stress from work. And then, the emotional, where it's the dealings with friends, that basically builds up. So,
yeah. Do you have a daily practice? Do you sit?
No.
So there's an option to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
definitely. So yeah, I do need to wrap up because we are running over.
Yeah,
but
I
you
appreciate
can,
it. Thank
yeah,
you so
absolutely.
much for your
Drop
feedback.
me a line
Really
if you
appreciate
like. Yeah, you've got my links in the chat, and
Yep,
always
yep.
feel free to drop me a message. Check out my site if this is something you want to explore more. We can get you started with something too.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, everyone. It's great to see you. Cheers. Take care.